Hi folks. You know, when you're using your table saw to cut a piece of wood, often you're just cutting a piece of wood into two pieces, and that's a through cut that you're going to make. And when you do that, whether it be a rip or a cross cut, you have a lot of choice in the height of the blade. Typically, you're going to have the blade at least to where the gullet clears the piece of wood. That's the little divot between the teeth. There are times, however, when you want to use the table saw to make a different type of cut, like a dado cut, one that doesn't go all the way through the piece of the wood. Now, in the middle of the piece of wood, that would usually be a dado, but sometimes you want to do a rabbet, which is similar to a dado, but off to one side of the piece of the wood. Like if you're making drawers and things like that, you would often make a rabbet cut. Now, when you do those kind of cuts, often the height of the blade really does make a difference. And there's various ways to set the table saw blade height. And today we're going to talk about some of the options that you have to set the height of this blade when it really matters. So stick around and let's learn together. We have a wide variety of options when we want to set the height of this blade, and we're going to take a look at those here in just a bit. But first, before you start, there's a couple things you need to set up. And the first thing is, make sure the table saw is turned off. You don't want it kicking in for any unexplained reason while you're working with the blade, because you are going to touch this blade as we're doing this. So, once we've verified the table saw is unplugged, the next thing we need to do is find the center of the blade. And the reason for that is, as the blade rotates, there's going to be a high point, the apex of the blade. And that's going to be very important for setting the height of the blade, obviously. We need the part that's going to cut the deepest into the wood. So one of the first things we need to do is find where the center of the actual blade is. One way to do that is to take out your throat plate and look down and find your arbor. Once you find the arbor, you can use something to make a small mark. And I'm just visually doing this. But you can make a small mark right where the center is. Then I'm going to put my throat plate back in, and then I have a way of referencing the center of the blade. You can also use whatever tool you're going to use to measure and rotate the blade a little bit and find the highest point of the blade that way. But that should be right at that mark that you put. You can also use the tool, like we'll show in a moment, to rotate it a little bit back and forth and just verify that. The first way we're going to look at measuring this is with a plain old tape measure. This is a tape measure my daughter got me recently, pretty cool. And what I can do is I put the tape measure up to the blade, and we're going to go for a 1/2 inch. Now I may have a little bit of parallax looking at this tape measure from this angle. I've got the cameras in the way, so it's a little bit hard for me to see, but that looks pretty close to 1/2 inch. I believe it needs to come up just a hair. So we're going to use our table saw adjustment, and we're going to set it to a 1/2 inch, and then we would lock it in. Now, if this is a very, very important depth that we're taking, measurement, because the two pieces need to be exact, often like in a rabbet, it needs to be exact. What I would do is take some scrap wood and cut with that and make sure I'm getting the measurements I think I should be getting with it. And I would do that with any of these measurement tools just to make sure, especially if you're using a really expensive or very important piece of wood, you don't want to mess it up. Okay, the next method we're going to look at are using setup blocks. And this is a set of, I believe it's 15 setup blocks I have. These are good around the shop for a variety of reasons. You can use these if you've made a rabbet and you want to verify the depth of the rabbet, and just a whole host of reasons to use these in the shop. But these are precisely milled so that you have a measurement on them. This one happens to be a 1/2 inch. And what we can do with these is make sure that they're turned the right way, orient it, and then we can look at the blade at its highest point and make sure, and I'm basically going by touch here, not the most exact method, but I'm making sure that that blade feels like it's right at the top of that block. It's pretty close. I could also put a ruler or something across here and then rotate the blade and see if it rubs and help make sure that it's at the 1/2 inch that I want. But these are quick and easy, and again, they're also versatile in a lot of different ways in the shop, something maybe to consider, even if you don't use it for this. Now we're going to kick it up a notch, and we have an electronic method that we're going to use. And this is a Wixey. I believe it's a 25 model, and it is a digital readout. And it is designed to take measurements similar to this. Now you can use this for other things also. You could actually use this, for example, on a bandsaw, where you put it up against the fence, and then this touches the blade, and then you could get a measurement to figure out how far the outer part of the blade is from the fence. You could do the same thing with the router table fence. Another thing I'll mention is that all these methods would also work on a router table. So if you needed to set the height of a bit that you were going to make a groove in a piece of wood, these tools would work on those also. Now I'm going to try to get the best shot of this I can with this camera. Hopefully that's going to come through. But a few things about this. This does have a plastic body to it. I'm sure there's probably a model you can get this metal. But being plastic, you know, it could possibly warp out of shape on you. It does have magnets on the bottom, and that's good. And on these type tools, it's very important to have a good frame of reference. And having this tabletop, it's very, very flat. That should do that for us. Now, we do have this throat plate, and it is possible that the throat plate could be off just a hair, one way or the other. It should be very smooth, but you know, it is possible that it's off. So that could throw a measurement off just a bit if the throat plate were off. There is a tool I'm going to show you next, which is actually going to kind of take care of that issue. Okay, what we're going to do is put this on a common reference point, turn it on, and then we're going to zero it out. And then we're going to take this, and we're going to go to that tip, and we're going to press this down. So if we want to make sure that's exactly right, let me push that down just a little better. Okay. So it wasn't quite snug, but it is 0.502, which is half an inch, and it's 2/1000th of an inch off. That's pretty darn good. It's probably good enough for us to use for this. I did do this exercise on one of my setup blocks, and as long as I had it on a very flat surface like this table, I was able to get it pretty much dead on. So the last tool I have to show you is a little bit more expensive than these others, and of course you might have guessed they're going up in price as I've been showing them to you. This is a JessEm. It is a large-scale imperial measurement height setting tool. It's pretty much dedicated for this type of work. It's stainless steel. It's incredibly well made, heavy. It has imperial units on the side, and it has two reference marks so that you can measure to the top of this plate here or to the bottom. And the way this works is it has a wheel you spin to loosen it, and you see those teeth are letting loose here. And now I can take it and move it to whatever height I want it. And we want to go to the half-inch mark here, and then you spin the wheel again. Whoop, make sure you get it where it needs to be. And then those teeth will tighten back up. And again, a little bit of a test here. If I put it on the half-inch, that's a nice snug fit. It does slide under there, but there's just a little bit of friction to it. So that's telling me that this is pretty accurate. So then what we do is we would take this tool and put it where we need it. And we should be able to rotate it, but to where maybe there's just a hair of a drag on it. And of course, I don't want to scratch this up too much, so I don't want to do that very much. But I am going to raise this just a hair. It feels just a little bit off. Okay, I'm going to call that good. That's going to work well. Now, here's the thing I like about this particular tool. This is the large model, and it's got a very large base. I mentioned earlier that the throat plate could be an issue if it's off, and I feel like mine is just a hair off. Now, it's probably good enough for what I need, but it's just a hair off, and it might dip down just a little bit on part of this. So if I put it on this tabletop, this cast iron tabletop, this is pretty much dead flat. I verified that. But this has a long reach with this piece of metal here, so I can make sure this is on this no doubt flat surface and reach over and make sure I get my measurement. Now, is 1/1000th of an inch like we saw on the other device going to matter? Probably not. But it just gives me a little bit of confidence to know that I can put it on this dead flat surface, reach over, and get a good measurement. And again, this will work on router tables also. Well, we've covered 4 of the basic options to set the table saw blade height. Again, these would also work on the router table if you needed to set the bit height for that. And many of these tools have other uses also. Of course, you have your basic tape measure that we discussed. Setup blocks, these are very versatile, and I just love having them in the shop for a whole host of reasons. We have the electronic options like this small Wixey. This is pretty much dedicated to this type thing, but like I said, it could be used for bandsaw blades, and if you turn it sideways, it would also allow you to set the distance to your fence, both on the bandsaw and the router table. This also has a small attachment on it that you can use to measure the inside depth. So you can actually stick this on the end of it and you can measure down, and let's say I needed to get the height of the groove below this table saw, I could do that with this also. This one's pretty much dedicated to just measuring heights of things, but it's very well made, stainless steel. I believe it's very precise, and it's just a nice unit to have. This is pretty much a luxury item. You definitely don't need this, but it's nice to have in the shop when you need it. All right, well, thanks for sticking around. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you come back soon. Check out some of the other content. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments. And if you'd like to like and subscribe, that certainly helps me out. I certainly appreciate it. Have a great day.